Thank you very much. Thank you very much, David, and let me certainly thank all of those, along with yourself, who were responsible for putting on tonight's celebration. I do have, I must say, one question for you. When you introduced at the very beginning, David, when you came up here, what you essentially said was that you were going to continue your predecessors' history of getting this meeting out on time. I believed you until I looked at the schedule and I saw that the last speaker is the Right Honorable Brian Mulroney. And you think we're going to get out here at 9:15. I also want to congratulate the Public Policy Forum on the silver anniversary of its annual tribute to Canada's public servants. Depuis un quart de siècle, le Forum a honoré ceux et celles qui se dévouent au service de la gouvernance publique du Canada, et je vous en félicite. Public service. I remember, as David just mentioned, I remember so many years ago walking into my dad's study after a day at school. He was then the Minister of Health and Welfare, and he was holding a meeting of his officials with his department at home. Not wanting to interrupt, I turned to leave. But my father stopped me and he called me in and he said, "Paul, I want you to meet some of the finest people that Canada has ever produced." And then he said, "It has been such a privilege for me to work with them." We're looking around this room tonight. I see a great number of public servants with whom I worked during my time in government. And if my father were here, I would remind him of that day in his study, and then I'd say, "Dad, I now know exactly what you meant." I'm also honored to share tonight with a group of Canadians, the former prime ministers, who contributed so much in service to their country. And we have a lot in common. Joe Clark's story about Right Hon. I've got to tell you, Sheila and I were in Mexico not long after I stepped down, which is a euphemism for having lost the election. We were in Mexico, and I went to get my ticket at the gate. I think it was flying Aeromexico or something. I wanted to get my ticket. And of course, the lady, I couldn't believe it. Here we were in Mexico, and she didn't recognize me. And she said, she said, "We don't have you here, Mr. Martin." And I said, "Well, you have. I have a reservation." She said, "Well, we don't." I said, "I can tell you that I have seat 6A." And she looked down, and she said, "Oh, you're Mr. Right On." And I said, "Right on, baby." We've also shared the challenge of finding another pursuit, a new passion for life after politics. Truth be told, in my case, I have long known what that would be. As a young man in university, I got a summer job as a deckhand on a tug barge in the Northwest Territories. We traveled the length of the Mackenzie River carrying cargo from Great Slave Lake to the Beaufort Sea. It was a tug barge. I worked hard. I saved money for school. I grew just a tremendous beard. I also made friends with a number of people my own age, all of whom were either First Nations, Métis Nation, or Inuit. They were hardworking and smart, and each of them was every bit as eager as I was to raise a little bit of cane and port. As young men at the beginning of their adult lives, we had much in common. But when we talked about the future, I found there was a deep, deep difference between what they expected from life and what I expected. I, as did my friends back home, looked forward to the years ahead with excitement and with hope. But too many of the young Aboriginal men I worked with saw little reason for excitement and even less for hope. They had grown up watching parents suffer, friends and family suffer, whole communities suffer in the shadow of discrimination, neglect, and need. Le Canada n'était pas celui que je connaissais. Leur pays était aveuglé par les conséquences de la colonisation, gênés par les années d'indifférence, par la pauvreté et le désespoir injustifiable que vivaient leurs parents. In the early years that follow, I check in with my friends, and some had found success, but more had not. Some were in jail, others battled addiction. 2 had committed suicide. If I have any regrets today, with my political career behind me, the greatest is that for Aboriginal Canada, too little has changed, too little progress has been made, the unfairness continues. But time marches on. Time marches on. We cannot mourn our dreams. We can only strive to fulfill them for the future. Ours is the privilege of living in a country that is fair and decent to its core. As a society, we have labored for justice, and in large measure, we have succeeded. But when we look at Aboriginal Canada, we are blighted. We are blighted by our blind spots, by years of attempted and sometimes violent assimilation, by unjustifiable poverty within our borders and on the margins of our common life. As long as that remains, as long as Aboriginal Canadians feel the stifling melancholy of dreams undreamt, our work will be unfinished, our potential will be unfulfilled, and the full promise of Canada will be unkept. Aussi longtemps que cela perdurera, aussi longtemps que les Canadiens autochtones ressentiront cette mélancolie étouffante de voir leurs ambitions limitées et leurs rêves s'éteindre, notre travail sera inachevé, notre potentiel ne sera pas réalisé, et le Canada n'aura pas su garder sa promesse. None of us, not one of us in this room, needs to hear the statistics of disease, infant mortality, incarceration rates, suicide. We know the reality, and most of us have seen it firsthand. And yet too few Aboriginal leaders, and there are some of the great ones in this room tonight, have found in us the partners they need as they seek to scale the heights of indifference that confront them. We are a kind nation, and Canadians are a good people. It is not out of malice that we allow these conditions to continue. It is not out of cruelty that we turn away from the images of squalor, racism, and the voices of those in need. But we are too numb, too familiar, perhaps, to be shocked by the misery that is in our midst. And so for too long, we have chosen complacency. We've let languish generation after generation of untapped potential. And we have watched history repeat itself before our eyes. This doesn't have to be. Over 20 years in public life, and I know that all of the other prime ministers who have spoken to you, and when Brian comes up, he will say the same thing. We saw Canadians at their best and their proudest. I saw our country in moments of triumph and in moments of loss. I know what we're capable of. I have seen the power of our quiet patriotism, and I know the sense of the determination and the sense of the spirit of fairness that beats within the Canadian heart. So to the men and women of our country, to the young Canadians today, Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal, who will lead us tomorrow, I would say we have accomplished much. But working together in a real partnership, one of true respect and true understanding, we can accomplish so much more. This is certainly the right thing to do morally, as it is in terms of the values that we do not hesitate to proclaim around the world. But it is also the right thing to do in terms of our economic future. It is the responsibility of all of us in this room to work with Canadians to change what for too many is a given, recognizing that if we continue to ignore the education and the potential of the youngest and the fastest growing segment of our population, we do so at the expense of the hopes and dreams of every single Canadian not yet born. They who will face a global competition, Joe has just talked about it, the likes of which we have never seen. J'éprouve une grande fierté dans tout ce que nous avons accompli comme pays. Mais l'embarras de la réalité autochtone au Canada nous rabaisse. What matters is not just the sincerity of our intent or the eloquence of our rhetoric. What matters is the real, the tangible, and the lasting improvements that are made in the lives of Aboriginal Canadians throughout the land. Our fellow countrymen and women, too long ignored and so eager to experience the benefits of the prosperity that most of us simply take for granted. We have a future to deliver. Promises inscribed in the parchment of treaties and in the words of our Constitution, but also etched in the hearts of so many young people who have been touched by the experience of their elders. Their lives will be our legacy, the legacy of each and every one of us in this room. So with all the passion that I can muster, with all the faith that I feel, and with all the confidence I hold in the country we share, I have but one hope tonight. It is that the next generation of Aboriginal Canadians becomes the generation that stays in school, that breaks the cycle of poverty and despair, la génération qui prospère sur le marché du travail et qui crée les grandes entreprises, the generation of First Nations, Métis Nation, and Inuit that discovers the new truths of science, that paints the great paintings, that plays the great music, and that brings into this world their own generation of children who grow up to view life with excitement and hope full of promise, the bounty of Canada, theirs to share at long last. Thank you.